This episode has been brought to you in part by the Azrieli Music Prizes, celebrating 10 years of promoting excellence in music composition. Come experience the musical imaginations of AMP's 4 extraordinary 2024 laureates. The Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal Chorus and Maestro Andrew McGill give the world premiere of their prize-winning works for the AMP Gala concert on October 28th at Maison Symphonique in Montreal. Learn more at azrielifoundation.org/AMP.
Join me in a chant for the hostages because we have power in number. So everybody together, bring them home! Bring them home!
That's what it sounded like on Sunday in Toronto when Shai Davidai, the Israeli activist who teaches at Columbia University in New York, joined the weekly pro-Israel rally on a North York street corner. It was Davidai's first public stop on a 3-day Canadian speaking tour sponsored by Tafsik, a local pro-Israel organization. He's here to share what his year's been like fighting campus antisemitism, both in person and increasingly online through social media and his new podcast. Before October 7th last year, Davidai was a rising star in the academic world, teaching at Columbia U's business school, where he researches the field of behavior and decision-making. He comes from a prominent Israeli family. His grandfather helped found El Al. He is a progressive Jew and an opponent of the Netanyahu government. But after October 7th, Davidai couldn't believe the explosion of hatred he was witnessing on his own campus. Hatred of Jews, hatred of Israel, hatred of Zionists, and also at other American Ivy League schools. So the tattooed, thin, 40-something academic made an impassioned speech to Jewish parents, and he asked his students to film him. The video has been seen by over 250,000 people on his YouTube channel alone so far. Here's a bit of it.
I have 2 beautiful children, and I'm talking to you. I'm speaking to you as a dad, and I want you to know we cannot protect your children from pro-terror student organizations because the president of Columbia University will not speak out, because the president of Harvard University, because the president of Stanford, because the president of Berkeley, they will not speak out against...
Davidai's now become a prominent symbol of pro-Israel and pro-Jewish pride. He says you can't fight against anti-Semitism. That has never worked. Instead, you can be more successful by framing it as a fight for Jewish civil rights. That's just one of the items in his toolbox of techniques that he hopes Jews in the diaspora can use. Here are a few more. Show up in person at rallies and memorials and Jewish events. Don't bother fighting anti-Semitism and the haters. Instead, make allies with non-Jewish groups and win the hearts and minds of people, the upstanders, who won't look the other way in the face of hate. I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, October 21st, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
This is an audition to be a cantor.
But I don't want to be a cantor.
I wasn't raised with any religion. You're Jewish, though.
The heartbeat of community.
I welcome Sam into my community by first taking his foreskin and next showing him the beautiful Twister bagel.
Culturally Jewish is the only podcast covering the weird, wide world of independent Canadian Jewish art.
Listen to Culturally Jewish at the cjn.ca/culture or wherever you get your podcasts.
From his debut public moment a year ago, Shai Davidai has now become a sought-after speaker. It's not his first trip to Canada. Montreal's Jewish community brought him in last month for a rally at Concordia University. His own school, Columbia, was the first campus where pro-Palestinian protesters would set up a tent encampment in the spring. Others soon followed, including here in Canada. He tried to enter, but was not permitted. But his efforts have had some impact since he began spotlighting college policies that he feels tout free speech, but not for him or Jews. Columbia's president resigned over her handling of the Israel-Palestine protests. Later, 3 Columbia deans were forced to step down. They'd sent each other texts full of antisemitic tropes. To be fair, not everyone agrees with Davidai's tactics. He names and shames students and staff who he feels supports terrorists. He sometimes swears on social media. And last week, his own university barred him from coming back onto campus temporarily after he criticized a senior university employee. The school calls it harassment, and he has to take mandatory training about the school's policies governing employee conduct. Now, this trip to Canada was planned long before his most recent clash with Columbia. Shai Davidai joined me at the Maple Downs Golf and Country Club, where he was leading a training workshop for some Jewish leaders. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to Canada again.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a bit torn. On the one hand, I'm so happy to be here with the community. On the other hand, I feel like it's a shame that there's a need for me here. You know, it's a shame that I need to be and speak about these things.
True. And I know this isn't your first time in Canada when Montreal students in the very first week of school had their opening rally, solidarity rally outside Concordia. I know you were there in the crowd.
Yeah, it was a beautiful event.
What was their attitude, their intention for the year?
The interesting thing about the rally that was held outside of Concordia is originally wasn't supposed to be there. When I was coming in and I said, like, look, let's do some rally. It was just after the 6 hostages were executed. And people said, the Jewish people of Montreal won't come out. And I said, why not? And I said, they're afraid. And then someone said, I think it was a student that said, how are we supposed to keep coming out every day if the Jewish people won't come for one day? Right, so we held it intentionally at 7:30 p.m. right outside of Concordia. We didn't know how many people would show up, and I think about like 2,000 or 2,500 showed up. It was, for me, it was incredible. It was a show of strength. It was basically the Jewish community saying, like, look, we're not fighters, we're not violent, but we are not going to disappear. We live here and we deserve to be here. Even if it's scary, we're here. That was, for me, the most incredible moment of that visit.
And then this is your second time in Canada since you became a public figure. And I know earlier Sunday, our listeners will know, there was a weekly rally at Bathurst and Shepherd, but it wasn't as usual. Can you describe what you saw and how you reacted to it?
It's very different from what I'm used to because we have a weekly rally for the hostages in Central Park every week, and it's this beautiful show of community and force, and you know, it's in the park, it's secluded, and it's for us and to show the world we're here. What I saw in Toronto was very different, like standing right in the middle of the intersection and showing like we are here, and the Canadian flags and the Israeli flags. It was such a show of force. I was impressed. Like, I feel like we need to bring that now back to New York City. It was very unfortunate that this was also counter-protested by 2-3 dozen masked individuals, especially since this was happening on the week where Yahya Sinwar was eliminated, right? Like, you have this arch terrorist who plotted and organized and put into practice the October 7th massacre. This is the week that you decide to come out and counter-protest? Like, it doesn't sound right. Like, their morals are completely twisted and distorted. But for me, being on the Israeli Jewish side and many non-Jewish allies, right, Iranian, Indian, was just it gives me hope. Now, I'm not super hopeful. I'm not a very optimistic person, but I hold on to every sliver of hope that we can get because very important. It's easy to think about how bleak everything is and how dark everything is, but then you show up and you see this rally that's happening every week for 54 weeks.
And that's not just in Toronto. Montreal has it. Vancouver, Winnipeg, they all have.
It shows you how resilient the Jewish people are. For me, that's the most important thing, that we keep showing up.
you're in the States, you're at the epicenter. Columbia was the epicenter, started it all in terms of campus encampments. How closely do you know what's going on in Canada with terms of the student, campus, street protests? What are you following?
I try to keep up with as much as I can with the news. Honestly, I can't, because it's happening everywhere all the time and all at once.
Like the movie. Everything, everywhere, all at once.
It just feels like there's something happening at McGill, Concordia, Toronto, York, then there's something happening in the streets, and then there's something happening in Parliament, and it's just, there's so much happening. So whenever I come to a place, I speak with as many people as possible, and I say, like, I come here to tell you my side of the story, but also to learn, like, what are the things people are most concerned about here. Now, there are things that are global, that all of us in the West, or let's say North America, are dealing with right now. Very generally, it's the same trends. It's the same sort of Islamic jihadi ideology meeting Marxist-Leninists wannabe revolutionaries with neo-Nazi extreme right-wingers jumping on the bandwagon. That's happening in New York, it's happening in LA, it's happening in Toronto, it's happening in everywhere. And unfortunately, it's happening what I call in the beer halls and the lecture halls. It's happening both like in the blue collar, kind of like, union kind of organizations. And at the same time, it's happening in these like elitist, very snobbish rooms, lecture halls, where the professors have this air of authority, but they're not teaching, they're indoctrinating a whole generation of people to hate.
I read an interview that you gave, so many that you've done, but one of the answers you gave shocked me, and I want to ask you to explore it a little bit. And that is about, you find that the people who have masked their faces and covered their faces act like a cult acts. And I know you study behavior. This is your research for years, right? Where did that come from, that definition that you see that, and have you seen that in Canada too?
So people forget that I am trained as a professor of psychology. Being an activist and organizer is something new to me, and that's something that I've dedicated the last 15 years of my life to, studying human behavior. So two things that affect human behavior, especially in large groups, is one, the sense of de-individuation that's happening, and two, the sense of diffusion of responsibility. Right? So de-individuation happens when people mask their faces, so they feel like they can't be recognized, so they are free to do what they want. That's why we see more violence at night rather than during the day, because it's dark. And diffusion responsibility happens when there are more and more people, and you don't feel responsible for whatever happens because you're part of a crowd, you're part of a mob. These things are not unique to any specific social movement or protest. These are things that happen in sporting events. It happens in hooliganism. It happens in many different ways. It happens with Hamas terrorists. They mask their faces, they act in groups, so they don't feel like they are the ones doing the horrible things. It's the group does it. But it also happens with the supporters of the terrorists. The same thing. I never, when I started out, the first time I ever spoke up, I introduced myself. I said, my name is Shai Davidai. I'm an assistant professor at Columbia Business School, right? Because for me, I don't have to hide anything. And when I started seeing people showing up to these protests completely masked up, completely like trying to de-individuate themselves, I realized like they are trying to hide something. Now, what is it that they're trying to hide? It's not their ideology, it's not their politics. They're trying to hide themselves because they know that when they push hate, it's the wrong thing to do. So that they say we're afraid to lose our job in the future.
But there's been no consequences except for one person on your campus, for example, or here in our country, there's maybe one or two kids banned from Concordia, and that's it. No consequences.
Exactly. But even if there were consequences, if you truly believe in what you do, you should be willing to pay the consequences. That is what it means to be an adult. If I lose everything that I have, my job, my money, everything, if I lose everything, I would still be okay with it because I know that I'm fighting for what's right. So that's why I'm not hiding myself. The fact that these people act in such a cowardly way shows you that they don't have the true conviction, they just have hatred.
And that's cult-like because...
Every cult, like even to strip it away from violence, every cult that you've had in history, the way they operate is there's a very charismatic leader and a mob that de-individuates themselves, right? They basically say, we are no one. Sometimes they call each other comrade or brother or something, just to make, like, because you're no longer yourself, you're part of the bigger group. And that's a problem, because when you're part of the bigger group, you're no longer beholden to your own morality, you're just following orders. When
you last week had that incident where you were told you're not allowed to be on campus in Colombia, this is your first foreign trip since then. What happens now? When is it over, and what are you doing about it? Also, do you have a union or faculty association that can grieve this?
So there's no union, there's no organization, and that is in fact part of the problem. There's no due process. Columbia University, like many universities in the US, they decided that they want to get rid of me, and they just got rid of me. They didn't even tell me what I did wrong.
They said you...
Harassment, intimidation. Luckily I have lawyers. My lawyers ask them, who did he harass? How did he harass? Who filed complaints? Give us information. We heard nothing. Because Columbia is the judge and the executioner. They don't need to give us answers. It's been tough. Personally, it's been one of the hardest few days for me and my wife and our family. At the same time, I think Columbia University did what it does best, which is mistakes. They gave me a platform again.
It's not the first time, April, they did it too.
Yeah, they thought we'll get rid of Shai so the problem goes away. Well, it turns out that the problem doesn't go away because so many people are now more interested. Because Columbia thought that I'm the problem, and if they realize, no, I'm not the problem, I'm the one pointing at the problem. The problem is the support for terrorism on campus. And now more people than ever know about it. I just hope that one day Columbia will learn from its mistakes.
They lost the president. They lost 3 deans. Now the COO is probably your nemesis, or he and you have this.
I would love to know him, get to know him better, have him over for Shabbat dinner. But at the current moment, he is playing into the hands of the anti-Semites. He may or may not be an anti-Semite, but he's awfully comfortable with antisemitism. For me, that's a problem. Like, if I wore, let's say I was able to enter a time machine and go back to the 1930s in Germany, before the Holocaust, before the snowball got too big to fight, I wouldn't fight the Nazis. I would fight the administrators. I would fight those that are indifferent to the Nazis. Because the Nazis, you can't fight hatred, but you can fight the people that are willing to look the other way and let hatred take root. And to me, that's the problem. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm not fighting the people that support Hamas. I'm fighting the people that allow them to openly support Hamas on American campuses.
It's a bit different in Canada, in my experience, because it's not an elite. There's not as rich families. There's subsidies. It's not the same kind of Ivy League stuff, right? There's a couple of well-off schools with foundations, but it's not the same situation. Yet, it seems that there's more hatred on campus, ingrained in the U of T, in the syllabuses. They're having Francesca Albanese come and speak at the U of T, but they don't want you. What do you have advice for Canadian universities? Because I, as a former professor and mom of university kids, I don't see any future in the next couple of years changing. I think it's really bleak.
So first of all, I have I don't know if this is advice, but for all Canadians, my understanding is that Canadian universities are about 60% subsidized by taxpayer money, at least 60%. That means that you go to work, you earn money, you pay your taxes, and those taxes go to pay for someone who believes that Israel has no right to exist and that Canada doesn't have a right to exist. And someone who not only supports terrorism, but actually celebrates it in their class or out in the hallways or in the encampment. That is your money. That is something that should trouble you. If you were living in 1930s Germany, your money would be helping the Nazis take hold in universities. Right now, your money is helping Hamas take hold in Canadian universities. Do something about that.
What can they do? So the donors can pull their money. that's happening.
I think taxpayers should just, rise up and say, you know what, enough is enough. I'm not Jewish. I don't even know where Israel is on the map, but my money should not be funding professors who are openly supporting terrorism. Period. Like, I think that's common decency.
But it's also the universities, but also the public schools now, as you heard in Canada, and the unions and the hospitals, and it's pervasive in our country now. Jew hatred, Jew exclusion, Jew canceling the Jewish culture.
Right, and I think so. Whenever I try, so the Jewish people, I always tell them, our first inclination is to hide. Our second inclination is to run. Both will not work for us because that's what we have done in the past. We finally have a place to live in a democracy. We need to fight back. Peacefully, non-violently, but fight back. That means, showing up in tens, hundreds, thousands of people in the streets or on campuses demanding, for equal treatment. We don't want a special treatment, just equal treatment. But I also speak to non-Jewish people, Canadian non-Jewish people, American non-Jewish people, and saying, what do you think will happen if they have their way? Let's say they get rid of Israel. Let's say they get even rid of what they call quote-unquote Zionists, meaning 95% of Jews. Do you think this will end and they'll protests, will just finish? Do you think they'll just go and sell their kafiyas and no longer? No, of course not. They are telling you what they want. They want the demise of Western civilization. They have a problem with quote-unquote colonialization. They have a problem with the quote-unquote imperialism. They have a problem with the West and what it stands for. And they're telling you that. That's not me being rhetorical or me trying to translate them. So if you care about where you live and you want your kids to have the same standard of living and same freedoms as you do, you should start fighting back. And it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not Jewish, because this is about your life.
Last question. Who's better for Israel and Jewish people? The election in the United States is in 2 weeks.
Israel and the Jewish people have been here way before Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and we will be here way after their names are forgotten from the books of history. We don't need them. We can use their support.
You need the finances for the weapons, yeah.
Here's the thing that I tell people. What do you think will happen if tomorrow the United States says no more money? Do you think Israel will just say, okay, we'll just die? No, we will get the weapons. We will get it from India, we'll get it from China, we'll get it from Russia. We don't want to because we align with the Western democracies. But if you force us to it, we'll have to do that, right? So in my point of view, the way I see it is the US, Canada, the West is not doing Israel a favor by arming it, by helping it.
Canada's not doing it because they blocked arms sales, right?
Israel is doing the West a favor by remaining the democracy that it is in the Middle East. Because if you don't help us, defend ourselves, we will defend ourselves. But that we may not be aligned with the West anymore, and then the West will be effed. It'll be screwed.
There goes my non-explicit podcast rating. No, it's all good.
Yeah, sorry. I've been trying to tone down my language, but sometimes I get really angry and I have to speak up.
I don't know how you keep going. I know. Did you get any new tattoos because of this?
I got 2 new tattoos. The first tattoo that I got is I wanted something Israeli, but not something like ultra-nationalistic. So I got Israel's national bird, the upa, duchifat, which is just, I love that bird. And then 2 weeks ago for Rosh Hashanah, I got myself the first Hebrew letterings that I have on my body, and it says emet, truth, which to me, this is what we're really fighting for. Yes, we're fighting for our survival, we're fighting for our existence, but we're just in a fight for what is the truth. I refuse to accept that we are in a post-truth world. And the only way to fight that is to keep speaking up the truth and fighting the lies.
I'm finding hope in these new I call it muscular Judaism, where they do things that federations and big donors don't do anymore. They're actually mobile, agile, much more quick. Not everyone agrees with their techniques, but that's my silver lining, is the engagement, the not maybe religious, but a lot of people are going to synagogue and getting involved. Young people too. This is their fight now, and they're here.
It's exactly these kind of grassroots organizations and movements that will allow us to win this. The big organizations are not built for this. They're not built for this moment. They're doing their best and they're doing a lot of good, but they're not built for this. And it's organizations like Tafsik, it's organizations like End Jew Hatred, it's organizations that are smaller, more agile, that are built for this.
We have to go. Thank you for being on the CJN Daily.
Thank you so much.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part by the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Organizers of Davidai's tour had also planned for him to attend a lunchtime rally on behalf of Jewish students at the U of T's campus on Monday, although some Jewish groups had been a little hesitant for it to go ahead because the campus has been a volatile staging ground all year for anti-Israel protests. Davidai also speaks in Winnipeg on Tuesday, where the Jewish community is dealing with the fallout from a professional development conference held for teachers and senior educators last week, where attendees were urged to see terrorism as resistance. The speaker has since apologized. The Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.